Hello, everybody. Good morning here on the West Coast, good afternoon on the East Coast, and good evening if you're joining us from Europe or Asia. My name is Steve Fair. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Eightfold AI, and I'm so pleased you could join us today for our webinar on reimagining the use of talent acquisition technology for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have wonderful presenters and great information to share with you today. Before we turn over the webinar to our presenters, I look forward to introducing them here. I'd like to just tell you very briefly about the webinar panel that you're using right now here in BrightTalk. We do look forward to answering some of your questions toward the end of the webinar. And if you have questions at any time during the webinar today, please just put the question in on the panel on the right side of the webinar screen where you see questions for the presenters, and we will take your questions at the end of the day today. With that, I would like to introduce our featured speakers today. First, Julie Hippica, Vice President of Learning and Leadership Research for Human Capital Research and Sensing at Deloitte. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Steve, thank you so much for having us, and hi, everybody.
Hi, Julie. We also are thrilled today to be joined by Chris Havrilla, Vice President of HR Technology, Strategy and Research for Human Capital Research and Sensing at Deloitte. Hello, Chris. Thank you.
It's great to be here, Steve. I am thrilled. I know Julie's thrilled to be here and to talk about this topic. I'll just give us a brief introduction. We are from Deloitte's Human Capital Research and Sensing team. Many of you have known us for years as Burson. We did recently change our name of our offering to reflect the expanded ways in which we help organizations to increase capabilities and certainly the impact of its HR function. And we're as committed as ever to providing you guys with the comprehensive and actionable research that we'll be talking about a good bit today, as well as the related tools and other assistance. So we offer Workforce Sensing now, which gives timely and targeted insights on what's really going on at the intersection of your industry and your workforce and delivered on demand. And we're really excited, both Julie and I, to be here and representing our incredible team. And if you like what you hear today, please do feel free to share it on Twitter. We put our hashtag down there. We put our Twitter handles on there, and we would love to keep this conversation going. So we're super appreciative of you having us here to get this conversation going, Steve.
Well, we're really excited to have you, Chris and Julie. And before turning it over to you to share your research findings, just very quickly about who we are here at Eightfold AI. We are the inventors of the Talent Intelligence Platform, which uses artificial intelligence to transform how enterprises are hiring, developing, and retaining the diverse workforce today. We've been at this now for nearly 5 years, and we're now all over the world working with enterprises like yours in just about every country, continent of the world in order to help organizations with their hiring strategies using our deep learning AI technology. So we'd love to talk to you more about that after the webinar. But for today's purposes, I'd like to turn it back over to Julie and Chris to share their findings with us.
Fantastic. Well, so what is on our agenda today? So hopefully we're going to have a lively and frank discussion about a topic that I know is near and dear to our work and our hearts. And to frame it, we'll cover how we understand the importance of transforming talent technologies to help access and engage robust pools of diverse talent, examine how emerging technologies can facilitate change across the talent function and empower fair hiring practices, and also explore why harnessing the latest digital technology enables innovative sourcing and candidate engagement strategies and deliver compelling experiences. But this is a conversation, and we're definitely going to have time set aside for your questions as well. And, with that, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Julie to really kick us off on this.
So I'm going to, and I frequently find myself in the position of stating the obvious, there's a lot happening in the world right now. And besides a global pandemic, we've had all these different disruptions that have impacted our lives. And these are just some of the big, huge, overwhelming ones. And some of these existed prior to the pandemic. The changes in data, proliferation of technology, recognition that automation is impacting some people's work and positions, the increasing length of careers, the use of gig and contract and contingent workers, and something that we at Deloitte have written a lot about and talked a lot about, which is this idea of a social enterprise, an organization that recognizes that its role is bigger than just to its shareholders or whoever its owners are, that organizations have a fundamental responsibility to society and the ecosystems in which they play a part. But even if you just think about the last year, a global pandemic, and on top of it, the actions that we have seen, the transformation around the conversation of social justice, these things have profoundly impacted organizations, and so much so that one of the things that we at Deloitte actually had to do last year is add a special addendum to one of our huge, really big research things that we release every year, the Human Capital Trends Report. We collected our data prior to the pandemic and then realized that this was going to be a thing and released a special report to go along with it to talk about, okay, what does this pandemic mean for these trends? And, you know, this theme of disruption is you know, profound throughout all of our research. It's certainly profound in the businesses that we, as HR people, collectively support. We often think of disruption as change or challenge, and that's true. Obviously, there are opportunities within these changes, and organizations have done, I think, and Chris, I'd love your thoughts on this, a fantastic job of thinking more broadly and creatively about ways of working in light of all of these changes. So the amount of innovation and responsiveness and agility that I think HR has demonstrated in the last year to really try to address the needs of workers has been positive. But there is no doubt, and I'll go back to where I started, there's no doubt that there's a lot going on right now. And these are the things that we have to be thinking about in terms of our hiring practices, our hiring processes, what it even means to be a member of an organization these days as a full-time worker or a contingent worker. So there's a lot there. Chris, I know you have more thoughts. Would love to hear them.
I absolutely do. I think this has such huge ramifications for the workforce. And when I say that, I mean all workers, right? And you know, absolutely, with all of those balls in the air, right? You know, you see all those bullet points. I mean, that is an absolute enormous amount of things to juggle. But the future of work is human, and we're really trying to kind of focus people on, like, you know, what is this kind of common thing, right? Common purpose. And the future of work is really about humans, especially when we're starting to think about, you know, this massive role that technology plays, because, you know, in the past, it's always really been the technology was the work, right? And now we're looking at things in a whole nother way. But people often connect the future of work with the tech, right? With emerging tech, with AI. And technology is indeed a pretty important facet to this future. But I think the most forward-looking organizations, and for those most forward-looking organizations, those aren't just looking to optimize their current operations. We have really become accustomed to incremental change, right? Let's tweak this. Let's get more efficient. Let's get more effective. Let's reduce some costs. But it also creates new value in the future. So rethinking what work needs to be done, what the work is, what needs to be done to achieve their purpose and create more value for a broader set of stakeholders is really kind of key. And in our most recent workforce research, it showed that about 70% of high-performing organizations fundamentally rethink the way work is done and need to, realize they need to. Now, how much of that percentage is ready for it is really kind of, where the crux and where I think we can play the biggest role. And when I'm saying rethinking the way work is done, it's really by considering the problems that have to be solved for customers. And I think that's a key example, right? And what are the actual outcomes? And this new work, focused not just on efficiencies, but actually creating new paths to value, is uniquely designed for human capabilities like understanding context, identifying problems, figuring out solutions, collaborating with others, and making decisions based on unique situations. We've always thought about the world as a set of processes, right? Input, process, output, a set of tasks, a set of activities, all towards output. But now we're having to kind of rethink that and bring outcomes front and center, understanding, where we are and what are the decisions that we have to make and the actions that we need to take. So putting humans at the center means involving them in critical aspects of how do we synchronize all of this, right? And I think we've seen that more than ever in this last year is how do we absolutely have to synchronize the workforce and workplace. I think we've been thinking about this from a workforce perspective, but we have to bring in that work in the workplace. And boy, did we not see that in the last year. But high-performing organizations are involving their workers in those activities to a greater extent than do their low-performing peers. They're letting their workers figure out the how. They're connecting them to what the work is, why it needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and letting them be a part of the how. But it's hard, and we can't underscore the impact and importance technology plays in that. So let's go to the next slide. And I think with that question, right, or with that kind of statement in mind, that we need to actually ask the question, can organizations remain distinctly human in a technology-driven world? Can we really keep them in the center, right, of a technology-driven world? And we write a lot about that in Trends, right, in this kind of paradox of, can we do this? And what is our path forward? And what continues to amaze many of us is this gap that I mentioned just a minute ago between awareness and being ready to leverage tech for good, right? We know we're aware of these issues, but how do we actually do it? So for talent, I think experimenting with new technology has been kind of a standard operating procedure, right? We're always bringing in new tech, yet the tech has become more the work than more of the solutions and the outcomes that we really, really wanted. Yet we've got to extend the narrative and demonstrate that we can bridge this gap and change the way we use current technology and start to do things much differently. And add to that, we're all much more hyper-focused on fostering more diverse and inclusive talent pools. And so we've got to bring that in because humans are at the center of that. And we know this is top of mind for leaders. So Julie, just, with that in mind, can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on this?
Absolutely. So organizations today have a focus on delivering better and world-class talent experiences to everyone. But there's so much more increased recognition in the past year that part of that work is around creating equitable experiences for all of our workers, because not everyone is necessarily at the same playing field. So this idea of equity has become a much bigger part of the conversation in the last year, and it's a critical lens through which organizations can really look at their systems and processes and identify what do we need to change in order to enhance the opportunities for everyone to achieve success. And we've been studying the impact of a diverse and inclusive workforce for quite some time, and we know, and there's a wide body of research out there that's consistent with our findings, that organizations that do DEI well, organizations that create and have an inclusive and diverse workforce, are the ones that outperform other organizations. So that more innovative, better business outcomes, twice as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, more likely to be agile, and more likely to be high performing. These are all of the things that our C-suite and we and our workers want. This is the kind of work that we all want to be doing, and this is the way that we want to be doing that work. So if your organization is not sure yet, or is recognizing, we probably need to be doing something differently around D&I, but we haven't necessarily leveraged technology yet, we don't really know the right way to go, technology is a critical enabler, and also the practices that your organization engages in are critical to start to change the worker experience. So think that the whole idea of fostering equity, diversity, and inclusion is about more than just technology, but the impact that it has is also incredibly broad. And again, I just want to reemphasize that the win in all this, if you're looking for that business case, is that it creates the business outcomes that all organizations desperately want. We've seen this trend in our conversations with clients over the last year in particular, and some of the conversations that we at Deloitte are having as a firm around the ideas of DEI are that this is a fundamentally sort of human and right issue. And yes, there's a real business win in making different choices, but it's also the right thing to do. It's also the human thing to do. Chris?
Yeah, as we go into this next slide, this is probably my most favorite slide in this whole deck, because I feel like, as we, start to kind of, embark on this challenge, that we've got to kind of use technology and data to kind of bring all of this together. And I don't know if we can move to that next slide, hopefully. Yeah, because I want to give people the context, as we look to kind of harmonize the work and the workforce and the workplace in real time. I mean, you saw the data that was on the slide before. One of the things that has become kind of this passion point for me is, how do we not make the technology be the work, right? High-performing organizations are 5 times more likely to leverage new technology to augment human skills and capabilities than low-performing organizations. And while that's true, it's how we actually use the technology. So placing humans at the center doesn't diminish the importance of technology. They need to coexist, but how? And I think that's the crux of, if I were to point people to some of our most recent work around this, was when we talked about super teams and Deloitte's human capital trends. And we did, even add to that chapter when we did the 2021's version of these trends, right? How are we using it? And we've seen in the past probably 20, 25 years, right, we've we've really focused on efficiency. We've really focused on cost. And then we start to hear about some of the kind of the confusion and maybe fear around some of the emerging technology has really been, kind of even frankly in that substitution mindset too, but we kind of use technology as a trade-off, right? A trade-off, a substitute for the work. And, even when, we heard all the talks about, robot apocalypse and, the robots are coming to take our jobs. And, it still had that kind of substitution mentality. And our data is showing that people are starting to move away from that. They are starting to think about augmentation more and more and how do we become more productive. But we're still focused on current outcomes. And a lot of our research showed us that, very, very few companies are actually investing in the skills that we need to work with this kind of technology effectively. And I think that is one thing that we can do from an HR perspective is really, really push that. Like, how do we actually use this as a collaborator on our team? How do we actually use technology to make us better at work and, to make, work better for us too? How do we do all of this? How do we get to a point where we're moving beyond substitution and even beyond augmentation to actual collaboration? And we call that in our trends a super team. And how do we actually embrace technology as part of the team? But, organizations don't, there's really no choice in bringing into new technologies into work, right? And it really is, how do they best do it? So rather than playing people against machines in a replacement type scenario or a substitution type scenario, I think that what we're studying is the higher performing organizations are much more likely to use these technologies to augment human skills and capabilities and supporting people to do more work more efficiently, more productively, or give them better insights. Better insights and value is the key here. That is the key of even going beyond augmentation into collaboration where we can really have the kind of impact. And that is, how do we use what these tools and data can do to give us better insights and value? And that's where we're seeing, much fewer organizations looking to emerging tech and AI and things like that to give them better insights and value. And that's where the collaboration comes in. Because if we have better insights and we have better, to create that value, we are using those insights to make decisions and take actions. And today, we really have no choice. We kind of have to acknowledge, and I hate the cliche around the next normal, because I'm not even sure a normal exists, but, as we think about how we move from kind of we're just surviving and into thriving mode, at the center of what that looks like is our people. And we need to build new muscles and new technology and use technology to create the right environment and context for change. And this is really where reimagination becomes a working reality. And that's what we're thinking about doing, right? Reimagining the work itself and what those future outcomes are, not current outcomes. When we're talking about substitution and we're talking about augmentation, we're talking about what, our current outcomes are, but we've got to get a little bit more future focused and what those future outcomes are. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that, if we're going to get real granular here, what are the technology solutions for DEI that we're seeing for talent teams to use? And TA Tech solutions have already made inroads, right, and are driving right outcomes. And those, Julie highlighted on previous slides. And technology is augmenting processes and helping to achieve desired outcomes. But again, probably more the current outcomes, and at the same time, freeing workers to focus on higher value human interactions, such as creating experience and making, real lasting connection. the business case for a more diverse workforce has never been more clear. And as you can see from the slide, there's a lot of tech solutions for DEI that can help reshape the everyday work of TA teams, improving experiences not just for candidates, but the recruiter experience and the hiring team experience as well. And I mean, that could be in the shape of job postings and technology helping us identify, gender-coded words in job postings, or how we screen. AI can help us to, anonymize, right? It anonymizes to match skills and ensure screening is not affected by unconscious bias, or maybe raise those kinds of flags. Assessments, right? Machine learning is leveraged to maybe kind of assemble success profiles from all the data collection to ensure, or at least augment us, right, in the elimination of human bias. And I'll really hone in on the analytics side, because I think this is the biggest area that we can really truly embrace, because again, it goes back to that insights and value and data-based insights to provide recommendations or guidance on areas of focus, albeit specific jobs or teams based on candidate pipeline and historical hiring trends. And I think that's key is if we keep thinking about what is our future outcome, what can we do more of, better, differently, and how can we use these things to help do it? So, Julie, I don't know, can you could probably say a bit more here about our research and how high-performing organizations are focused on delivering top-notch experiences.
Yes. I actually wanted to share an additional thought before we go there, if it's okay with you, Chris, because I had a bit of a moment just now, even listening to how you were describing harmonizing the workforce and workplace, and thinking about these solutions for TA professionals. And I think what occurred to me is there's another level of harmonizing the workforce and workplace that is really powerful. And in our high impact workforce research, we found this. We've also been finding it in the past several years of our learning research around the power of what we call guided adaptation, which is giving people more information about their own performance. And I want folks on this call to think about this two ways. First of all, and I suspect most of the folks that we have on the call here are talent acquisition and HR professionals in one form or another. Think about how some of these tools that Chris is describing, the analytics that might be able to give you information about who's in your candidate pipeline and how that might relate to historical hiring trends and things like time to fill, how that helps your recruiting teams and you if you're a recruiter yourself, do a better job. And when we talk about the power of technology and data to improve the work and harmonize the work, that's exactly what we need. Because when you have more information, you can make better and different choices about what to do, when to do, where to do it, how to do it. And so think of this idea of harmonization and the power of some of this technology as almost a double or a triple whammy. You're making it easier for your TA teams and your HR folks to make different choices in their hiring process based on what is actually happening in real time. And then we collectively have an opportunity to illustrate how the power of that is something that we can replicate across our entire organization. So as automation becomes more available, as data becomes more transparent about the work, there's an opportunity to do exactly what we're talking about doing for you all as TA people across our organization, and talk about a way to make the experience potentially more equitable and fair. If people just have a better sense of how they're performing, it's something that we know translates into higher organizational performance, and it's also something that our workers really, really want. And that's probably the tie-in here to experience. So much of what we find is that mature, high-performing talent acquisition organizations build out everything they do with the idea of the candidate experience at the center. And they recognize that that candidate experience is individual. We can't look at our talent pools and the people in them as a monolith with identical needs. And particularly when it comes to underrepresented minorities, when it comes to people from diverse populations, thinking about what they might need in their hiring experience and every interaction that they have with your organization is really critical. We know that timely feedback is one of those things that predicts TA organizational maturity. Tailoring communications, really thinking about and talking about, we have this specific opportunity and we'd like to talk to you about it. And doing those things and handling the process in a way where we communicate where folks are in the process, good and bad news. When we build trust, that experience that one has during the hiring process, everyone here knows this, it starts to influence the experience you have once you're in the door. And so what you do in that hiring process can go a long way towards making or breaking the experience for your worker once they're there. So think about how this stuff, which for sometimes in talent acquisition and earlier in my career before I started doing learning, I did work in the recruiting space. Some of these things feel like, baseline service level agreements, like we know we want to get back to people. We know we want to let people know where they stand in the process. But these are things that genuinely matter, and handling those interactions in a way that respects and understands and recognizes the unique humanity of each person is one of those things that we can all do to really start to make a difference. I think I got really excited there. Where does technology come into that experience?
I mean, I love it because this is like, this is where I live. And technology does enable experience, and absolutely. In fact, one of our top findings in our latest TA survey was that high-performing TA functions use technology to better assess candidates and prevent possible misjudgments, which can lead to bias, which all echoes back to something that we really need to consider, right? From a TA, from a talent management perspective, particularly if we've made a commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion. And AI technologies are certainly transforming the way talent is sourced, and it's allowing recruiters to focus on the right candidates for the right roles in a fraction of the time. Automated systems that incorporate pattern recognition and predictive analytics are now able to search for candidates from multiple sources online and scraping information that can be useful in assessing a person's potential to fill a specific job and scoring them against profiles of current employees. And one of the things I loved when you jumped in and kind of started to bring that to life a little bit, is really even going deeper than, what we even had on the slide before. Tools can help, not only identify and recruit and develop in advance a more diverse talent pool, right? But, and we talked about identifying and addressing biased language in job postings and, by using natural language processing. But that key point in there is, how is this making us better in other ways, and I think nudging us at key points in the hiring process, or movement process or mobility process, anything like that, to increase awareness of potential bias using AI, but the overall experience, and that's a part of it, right? That is a part of that experience, and like I mentioned, automated systems, can incorporate, all of this, pattern recognition and predictive analytics, but how are we using it, right? How are we using it to not only impact our experience as hiring managers, as recruiters, but also as candidates and all worker types, right? But, I definitely think that, from that augmentation standpoint, it leads to CRISPR, more on-demand communication. It can kind of give us guidance on what to say and how to say it. Technology can kind of give us guided touch points and the ability to give transparent feedback. This concept of utilizing technology to do the kind of customized and personalized experiences, in this world of that we live in, right, where we're used to that at every level, and why we can't have that in our work experiences and our hiring experiences, in our job search experiences is huge. But all of these things can help kind of inform a holistic approach across all the talent life cycle, and I think that is super important. The ability to kind of objectively identify optimal candidates, takes us to all new levels on every side of this, right? And finding people is an evergreen struggle for many organizations. But TA technology is advancing rapidly, right? Which, and probably more so than in any other space, and it's been like that for a long time, which is really opening up a ton of opportunities for, everybody in the talent organizations to move away from kind of this transactional world that we've lived in, and not even in how we do our work, but how we interact with systems, to outcomes, that are much faster, much more efficient, much more insightful. And this is huge, and huge news for talent teams, because we now have the attention of senior leaders in the C-suite, and we actually have for a while now, and I think that if we go to the next slide, there's a bullet point right at the top here that is kind of mind-blowing, really, if you think about it, and while our research has clearly shown that talent acquisition has been a top priority for the C-suite, we also knew business leaders already understood the case for DE&I. We've been kind of playing in this space for a long time, even before social injustice protests drew the world's attention to this at all-time levels in the last year. But those events spurred many organizations to elevate DEI as a business imperative. And drink in that number for a minute. 96% of CEOs now consider DEI to be a strategic priority. And I think that's an important point here. DEI effort is not a short-term initiative to fix a specific workforce challenge. It should be a long-term strategy with a roadmap to improve overall performance and innovation, and how we kind of come at this. Talent teams have a huge opportunity to partner with IT to lead through this intersection of DEI strategy and tech strategy to kind of help facilitate solutions and directions. Like, if you think about this, people think it's a priority, right? It's coming across the desks of CEOs, CIOs, of CHROs. It's coming across all these desks, but who's owning it? Who is driving this? DEI strategy and tech strategy are finding its way in discussions beyond HR already. We know that. It's talent teams' opportunity. It's even a call to action to lead through this. Somebody actually has to lead through it. And it's not to have all the answers. It's to help facilitate solving for these challenges with tech and data and tools in hand that will support the strategy by whether it's generating meaningful metrics, insights, data, but all, again, to help make decisions and take actions. Again, you don't need to have the answers. It's taking charge to help facilitate these things. But an important point here is kind of, again, even with AI as collaborators, as part of our super teams, what's our role in being collaborators, right? We have to be trained, developed, audited, and managed. So do they. We've got to work together to do that, all with outcomes and future outcomes in mind. And we should think about who is training these systems and how we're working with these systems and what data sets are being used for that training and any underlying assumptions that are explicitly or implicitly being made. We want leaders to understand that the implementation of technological systems by itself will not reduce bias. It's how we use them. Back to the point we made even a few minutes ago. However, bias can be mitigated when we're aware of these underlying assumptions during the creation and deployment of new systems and kind of using that powerful intersection of humans and technology to again, work together to kind of, detect unexpected problems and understand others' sensitivities. But this is not just about system change. It's about systemic change. And so how do we kind of bring all of that together? So I don't know, Julie, what's your take on that, especially from a future of work perspective?
Yeah, I think I would really want to underscore those 2 points you just made, that as we implement these systems, we have to be smart and thoughtful about how we design them, who is designing them, and how they're being leveraged. Because the AI is only going to know whatever it is that we tell it. So if we are not challenging our own assumptions in the data that we're putting together to try to populate, let's say, a success profile or a candidate profile or what we think we might want, then we're not going to realize the full promise and potential of these systems and what the technology can do for us. We actually wrote a prediction just about a month ago as part of every year Chris and I and our other research leaders get the opportunity to play psychic and look into our crystal balls and talk about what we think is going to be top of mind for organizations in the year ahead. And one of the ideas that we believe strongly is that organizations are ready to start looking more at the idea of someone's potential over the course of their career, rather than relying quite so much on their proven experience, their educational credentials, and all of these things that we're very accustomed to doing searches for when we're trying to find talent. And the beauty, the real opportunity in that idea of thinking about hiring for potential and hiring with potential in mind is that it may be our way past some of the things that have often been real obstacles in how we create a more equitable and inclusive workforce. Because if we start thinking about potential, we might start looking beyond some of the things that have historically held some types of candidates back. We get hung up on certain types of degrees and educational credentials and certifications. We look for certain types of prior work experience and number of years, or sometimes too many years is just as bad as not enough. So thinking about and looking for what humans bring to work and how to embed that in what we're looking at to surface candidates is such an interesting opportunity, and maybe one of the great unlocks in this conversation around how do we really hire for this future of work. We have to do this because work itself is also made this shift from efficiency and predictability and repeatability to not just delivering value, but solving unforeseen problems. So how on earth do we hire people to solve problems that we don't even know exist, or we don't even know what they're going to be? So it really changes the equation on the conversations we have with our hiring managers and our workforce planning people around what types of folks we might need, because there's just not as much predictability to that anymore, given the decreasing half-life of skills and given just the ongoing disruption that we've seen. So if we look at and really hone in on those things that humans do, like being able to solve problems, being creative, understanding and recognizing one another's humanity, and we in talent acquisition and in HR start to say, we're here to hold the frame with you, organization, to make sure that we are emphasizing that when we hire people, and then look for ways to hire with that potential in mind, even if it's not fully realized in someone's work history. That's a real opportunity. And, we know that there are technologies, cognitive tools, and AI and experimentation going on to try to start to unlock this stuff. I'm not going to tell you that anyone has completely mastered this yet. It is a process, and Steve, I'm sure you would say the same thing. Your clients are learning what they can do with the tools as they try them and they iterate on them and they look at them differently. But this is a great time for TA, who's often been sort of the tip of the spear in the conversations with organizations, because you're sort of the sales for the talent experience, and so you're the innovators in HR. So you have this opportunity to really seize on to the idea of leveraging some of these tools and doing it in the right way to not only open up our aperture on the types of candidates that we might seek and look for, change the conversation around what qualified might mean for a role, but then also really leverage these technologies to create a better, individualized, contextualized human experience for every person that we engage with, whether we hire them or don't. So that was a big, long, elaborate way of trying to pump everybody up towards this is the moment, this is the time. Chris, what would you add?
I wish you could sit here and see. I was like pumping my fist because, and I love that you kind of focused on that opportunity, right, about solving problems. And, it kind of goes to what I was saying earlier, right, with with this kind of notion of not having all the answers, but getting that muscle set around solving problems and how do we kind of embrace this technology. Again, we're all in it together kind of thing, right? And they're part of our workforce. So we've got to build this muscle set around solving problems versus kind of executing processes. And so for me, and I don't know, Julie, if you've been watching the questions coming in. I'm super excited because they're completely in line with where you were kind of going. So I'm gonna kind of jump into a few final thoughts here, and get through the calls to action, because I'm kind of jazzed about getting to some of these questions because they're fantastic, and I love that people are thinking this way, because they're actually thinking about the problems, right? And not just execution, but how do we kind of solve for some of these big things? Because I will tell you that, we're constantly innovating now, right? We're constantly in a mode where we're having to solve problems. And when we solve those problems, by virtue of the fact of this is what innovation and transformation is, we're going to keep solving problems, because once we solve one set, another set is going to come. And so I want to just kind of talk about the notion of acceleration, because that's how it is. As we solve problems, it's going to come to new ones. And look, organizations have access to their data and increasingly sophisticated tools, like we've been talking about, to support what they want and need to do towards DE&I initiatives across the talent life cycle, or the entire talent life cycle. And I said this, maybe I said it explicitly, but I certainly, it's threaded in here that tools don't solve problems. The tech doesn't solve the problems, people do, right? With the tech in hand. And like any tools applied right and with intention and focus and good technique, you can build, what you want, what you need, what you're trying to get to. It's not just what can you do, it's what should you do and how should you do it. And it's not, again, just about making system changes. It's about making systemic changes. And the data and the technology are there to help, right? Support data-driven decisions and actions, just like as if you were hiring an assistant. We have to look at technology that way. We have to develop it that way as well. But again, with in for this topic, right, DE&I in mind. And look, the COVID-19, the pandemic accelerated the speed and need of being digital unlike anything we've ever seen, right? New ways of working, we kind of have this thing that's brought us all together, right? This combined new reality, and how we want to get there. And I'm getting bumped to the last one before I go to the middle, because the middle is to me like the heart of all of this. But it's not just about doing digital, right? Your tech strategy should help you be digital. Be digital. Technology should be a part of the talent equation, and AI should be a collaborator on your super team. And being digital actually helps you achieve outcomes you couldn't achieve before, making all of us, right? All of us humans at the center better at work and work better for humans, right? And so again, with innovation, transformation, new problems will keep coming. So the point I want to make here before we get to this last one is, staying the same can mean getting further behind. It actually will. But I think the difference now and the real caution here is not just about getting behind anymore. It's with all this acceleration and all this pace of change and all of these things at our fingertips to be used towards different ways, the real danger is never really being able to catch back up. And I think that brings us to some calls to actions. And then I want to get to the questions because there are some really good ones. If we go to the next slide, I do think that there's some calls to action here, and I'll go through them pretty quickly. You do need a cross-functional team from across the business to do this. I do think we in HR, we in talent, have to lead this charge, right? If we're going to be experts and have answers on anything, it's the pain of the organization and the understanding of human behavior and what they need to do. But we need technology people at the table too to help us, to manage and use, again, with tools in hand, how do we get to these outcomes? And we need people from the business and the pain we're trying to solve, right? So that cross-functional team to help get to these solutions. Nobody has the answers. You have to find them, right? And that's who you have to have together at the table. And I do think establishing roles across the talent lifecycle dedicated to bringing the DEI lens to everything, right? Decisions, processes, and systems is critical. How do we embed and enable systems and really, processes? Maybe it's actions and decisions that we talked about, right? That center DEI principles into the flow of our work and our overall technology strategy, which should be aligned at the hip. HR and IT should be aligned at the hip with humans at the center of what we're trying to do, and assess and continuously monitor progress against those outcomes that you're trying to get to, connected to compensation, connected to advancement. Don't make it about the tech, right? Don't even make it about the metrics, but what the metrics mean. And be transparent about DEI policies and performance. And I'm not going to say another word about that because there's an amazing question in the Q&A that's going to get to that. So I'm going to leave it at that, and then Steve, kind of open it up to you, and maybe you can kind of take us through some of these questions, unless there was anything else you wanted to add, Julie.
Let's get to the questions.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, Chris, Julie, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for the wonderful questions. I just want to add one quick thought as I see you present your findings and advice. Just more than ever, how we're seeing with the impacts of COVID-19 on all of our organizations and this new focus on DE&I, really the impact that we can have with organizations that focus on DE&I, with the stats you shared earlier. They're more likely to meet financial targets, more likely to be agile, more likely to be high performing, and not at the margin, but dramatically more likely. And the people who can create those impacts are you, the talent professionals who have spent an hour with us today on this webinar. You can drive these organizational changes and these tremendous benefits to your businesses, and you can do it now. If there was ever time you could do this now, it is your time now. It's a combination not just of the technology alone, but the technology and behaviors and your commitment. So I think that comes through so clearly. And that takes me to the first question. Because some of the things that we're shared on these slides are so powerful, we got a couple of questions asking if the slides will be available afterwards. We can't share the slides. We do have a recording of this webinar that will be posted afterward. You'll get a link to that. So please do go and review the recording. You can use that recording as well to help you make your argument to your CEO about why you should be making changes in your business process or new investments. I think there was also a question, I'll address this, Julie, to you, about the stats that we saw earlier. These stats, six times more likely to be innovative and 8 times more likely to have overall better business outcomes. Julie, are these stats for the United States, or were these stats for a broader segment of countries in the world?
So the data set there is a global one. It does lean a bit more North America centric. That question, though, prompts something else that I think I do want to make clear, which is that, what matters around diversity, equity, and inclusion does vary from geography to geography. So one of the real benefits of really being intentional about understanding the unique needs of your workforce in different places, at different levels, in different populations, is because creating an inclusive workforce in Asia Pacific is very different than creating an inclusive workforce in Europe, which is different than creating an inclusive workforce in the United States. What we're striving for across all these things is fair representation and equitable experience, one where everyone feels like they can be their authentic selves at work and belong. But we have to recognize that how we do that is going to vary in geography to geography. And we need to involve people. We talked a little bit about co-creation in this discussion. This is another great example of where co-creation can be powerful. You can't drive a global diversity strategy from the United States alone. So yes, we do. It is global data, but it does lean North America centric. The value in looking at what you're doing needs to take both a global and a local lens. While I'm pontificating, Steve, I'll also, since folks did ask about where is this data available and what's with this high impact workforce study, that is one of our recent high impact studies. And if you go to humancapitalresearch.deloitte.com and you're not a member, you can still register for test drive access, and you should be able to see some of the research assets from the high impact workforce study available to you.
Thank you so much, Julie. I want to address the next question to Chris. Chris, if you can elaborate a little bit about what is included in a success profile.
Absolutely, and I'm going to tee up Julie as well. There's actually a question also in there that I think is related around, no argument that assessment tools for hard skills, right, is a value add for diversity to level the playing field, right? But as you kind of move down the continuum to soft skills, they become exponentially less accurate as a success predictor. So what in the assessment is going to help with diversity in all those job categories if they don't work for assessment in general? So I'm gonna give this both a two-pronged answer, right? So when I think of it as success profile, right, it's we're used to kind of having profiles with skills and experience, but I think what really gets to a success profile, right, is what soft skills, so which is kind of a call out in what the second question was, but also what we call enduring human capabilities, right? And these are sometimes innate ones that can and should be developed, and then ones that we actually develop. And I'm going to let Julie expound a little bit on that in a minute, but I think when we talk about technology's role in assessing that, and it's not as easy and it's not as hard, this is where I talk about how do we come together with technology to make each other better, right? And the fact that most AI technology that they are what we call supervised learning systems, right? They're algorithms, which are really just a fancy way of saying business rules, right? But as we start to think about these things, like we have to help guide that technology. So when I talk about managing the tech and feeding the tech, and how do we, we have to invest in our talent, whether it's human or whether it is machine. And it's spurred a whole body of work that I have around AI and HR and understanding what AI is, and then also like how do you work with it and how do you manage it. But again, whether it's a human or whether it is a machine, people have to be workers in this space have to be kind of focused on these soft skills, or again, taking it to an enduring human capabilities standpoint. And that's where I want to bring in Julie, because she's been doing some phenomenal work around this space. And Julie, what would you add to that, if anything?
Oh, I was on mute. I do that in every webinar. My streak continues. Because we're almost at time, I think the main thing I would want people to sort of know and come away from this idea of bias in data, how do you evaluate some of these things that feel somewhat intangible? What does that mean for your success profile? Is, you can think about and look for what people have done. You can look for what people know. You can look for who people are. Rethink that there's a great opportunity to be thinking about what people could do, what people might be able to do. And perhaps assessment, and we have to rethink what assessment is, rather than being something that is quantitative and definitive around this person can do X or this person will be a fit for the role, to this is someone that has the potential, the possibility, and is worth further exploring in a human way to see how they might be able to succeed and perform. I'll stop.
Julie, I would love to pick it up from there very briefly as we end the webinar. Skills and potential is such a critical way of thinking about the path forward, and in particular to overcome some of these bias trends in hiring in the past. Before we close, I want to answer one question that we did receive around bias and historical data patterns. For this questioner, it is possible to remove those patterns of bias from the analysis using algorithmic methods. For our AI at Eightfold, we use a method called equal opportunity algorithms. It's not the only method like this. There are others. And so if you're considering a technology or process, you can simply ask for the proof that this is being done in order to prevent that bias trend. Thank you everyone for attending today. With that, I'd like to close out the webinar. We will be posting a recording. Thank you especially to our wonderful presenters, Julie and Chris, for joining us today. On behalf of all of us at Eightfold AI, we hope to see you on the next webinar, and have a wonderful day. Be good to each other.